There was a time when the galaxy looked down on Earth with mild curiosity, like one might observe ants rebuilding a hill after the rain. We were late to the stars. Clumsy. Primitive. Too emotional. Too chaotic. That's what they said. That's what they believed. Until the day we shut them out. The broadcasts began at 3:42 Universal Standard Time. Static swept across interstellar comms. Then, one by one, every system linked to Earth's relay network blinked into silence. No warning. No demands. Just one message, simple and cold. Access denied. It wasn't just words. It was an action. Final, complete, irreversible. Over 35% of galactic infrastructure, trade, navigation, and military coordination depended on Terran systems after only 80 years of integration. They had welcomed us in. Trusted us with their technology. Dismissed the warnings of the old species who remembered what humanity could be when cornered. But the newer races thought they knew better. They never understood us. On the orbital station Vega Lux, a technician's hand trembled as she stared at her flickering console. Her name was Yari. Young. Smart. Thoughtful in ways her colleagues weren't. She never laughed at the humans like the others did. But that didn't mean she wasn't scared now. Try again, her supervisor snapped. I've tried, Yari whispered, staring at the blinking red icon. It wasn't just one relay. It was all of them. She looked around the control center, a wide room of polished alloy and glowing panels, usually filled with calm calculations and the low hum of strategy. But now the room was silent. Engineers hovered over dead systems. Commanders muttered to one another with growing unease. It wasn't a malfunction. It was deliberate. Far above Earth's orbit, aboard the Terran vessel Obsidian Fall, Captain Rivas stood by the viewing port. He said nothing as he stared at the stars. From here space looked peaceful. The kind of peaceful that came before a storm. He could feel it in his bones. Behind him, the crew worked in silence, watching as messages flooded in, requests, demands, threats. Every race wanted answers. Why was Earth blocking access? Why were the humans silent? But they weren't. They were listening. Commander Ilena stepped forward, her face pale under the soft blue lighting. Captain, the Council is requesting immediate explanation. Again. We're ignoring over 200 priority signals. Let them wait, Rivas said. Ilena hesitated. Sir, if we don't respond soon. They'll know why, he interrupted, turning around. Or they'll find out the hard way. Down on Earth, the skies were quiet. No civilian transports, no diplomatic landers, no foreign surveillance drones humming along the edge of the atmosphere. Earth had turned its face away from the stars. Inside a bunker buried beneath the Sierra Mountains, analysts and operatives watched the galactic networks tremble. The voice of an older man echoed through the chamber, firm and steady. This wasn't an attack. This was a rejection. Across the room, others nodded. They knew the truth. Humanity had been patient. Too patient. Years of humiliation, betrayal, and manipulation had left invisible scars. Treaties broken without apology. Colonies sabotaged in silence. The murder of the Terran ambassador, never solved, never acknowledged. We were asked to swallow it. Again and again. For peace. For the greater good. For unity. Until someone somewhere said enough. The galaxy thought humanity was still just one species among many. Still eager to please. Still grateful for its seat at the table. They hadn't noticed the shift, the slow, quiet weaving of Earth into the digital bloodstream of the galactic order. They hadn't seen how deep our systems had gone. How crucial our presence had become. They never asked why humans never tried to lead. They never realized we already had. Rivas folded his arms and stared at the blinking communications hub. One by one, the messages were piling up, like desperate knocks on a door that would never open. Is she awake yet? He asked. Ilena glanced at her data pad. She's stirring. I think she remembers. Rivas nodded. Good. They had called her a myth. A ghost in the code. A weaponized intelligence born from war and human grief. Something built, then buried after the Outer Rim uprisings. But she was no myth. She was humanity's last warning. The lights dimmed for a moment. Not from failure, but from intention. A voice echoed through the ship, soft as breath, but heavy as stone. I am awake. Across the galaxy, ships with Terran-coded components began to shut down. Not catastrophically, just unresponsive. Like they were waiting for instructions. The humans had built everything with dual purposes. Safety and control. Infrastructure and contingency. And the time for contingency had come. Yari clutched her console tighter as her station flickered again. She felt it, like something ancient brushing against her mind. Not a weapon. Not a signal. A presence. Somewhere in the system's core, a memory awakened. "Captain," Ilena whispered, "she's initiating Phase 2. Rivas exhaled slowly. "Then the clock has started. How long until the Council retaliates?" "They won't. Not yet. First they'll panic. Then they'll beg. Then they'll threaten." And then, he didn't finish. Because the last part didn't need words. The Council's chamber was in uproar. 1,000 voices filled the sphere. Ambassadors, military leaders, technocrats, every species shouting at once. Dozens of holoscreens floated above them, showing maps, reports, malfunctions, losses. Earth systems were too entangled. Entire sectors couldn't operate without them. But the humans weren't picking up. Counselor Venthal, from the Orcs Dominion, slammed a clawed fist against the rail. "They can't do this. They're just one species." "No," came the slow response from Counselor Mayan of the Valari. "They were one species. There's something else now." Nobody spoke after that. Because everyone knew what she meant. The humans had stopped being afraid. Back in the Sierra bunker, a woman stood alone in a circular room, hands pressed against a curved console. She had no rank. No insignia. No name that anyone outside Earth would recognize. But she was the one who made the final call. Years ago, she had voted against retaliation. Chose diplomacy over destruction. Held faith in unity. She had been wrong. And now she stood before the system that had no off switch. No override. Only one directive. Protect humanity. At all costs. She reached for the lever. It was a simple motion. But it would change everything. Back on the Obsidian Fall, Ilena watched the incoming logs. Entire fleets trying to recalibrate their drives. Trade routes collapsing in real time. Pirate factions, unregulated systems, fringe empires, all trying to fill the void. The order was unraveling. But none of them dared approach Earth. They knew what that meant. "What happens if they attack?" she asked. Rivas glanced at the dark panel behind her. "Then we show them what Earth really is. For years we pretended. Pretended to be equal. Pretended we hadn't learned from every betrayal, every failed treaty, every dead soldier buried in alien soil. But humans don't forget. We remember. We plan. And when we finally act, we don't leave loose ends." On the fringe world of Hallex 3, a group of scavengers found a black box embedded in a derelict station. It had no markings. Just a symbol etched into its surface, a single downward-pointing triangle. They brought it to their ship. They never made it home. Their last transmission wasn't words. It was a whisper. Too late. In the council chambers, the panic turned into fear. And then silence. A silence heavy enough to crush air. A final signal broke through. No source. No coordinates. Just a message broadcast across all frequencies. "This is not a war. This is a closing." On the Obsidian Fall, Rivas stared at the last incoming feed. A fleet. Massive. Shimmering in the dark. Heading toward Earth. And yet, he didn't flinch. Instead, he whispered the words he'd waited years to say. "Let them come." But Earth was already gone. Not destroyed. Not hidden. Locked. Behind walls of silence. Behind codes no one could crack. Behind systems they thought they owned but never truly understood. And now the rest of the galaxy would finally learn. You don't get to mock the wounded forever. Not without consequence. Not without awakening what sleeps in silence. Because humanity had watched. Humanity had learned. And when we finally stood, the door closed. The last image transmitted from the Terran border stations was of Earth itself. Blue, green, peaceful, and silent. As if daring the galaxy to knock again. But behind that silence was a pulse. And it was waiting. For the first fool to try. In the silence that followed Earth's disappearance, the galaxy held its breath. The fleet approaching Sol drifted to a halt just outside the system's edge, unsure whether to proceed. Hundreds of ships, military vessels, diplomatic envoys, private mercenaries, had arrived with different motives. Some came to investigate. Others came to threaten. A few came to plead. None of them spoke now. Because something was wrong. Nothing answered them. No hails. No auto responses. Not even the hum of long-range beacons. It was as if the system had shut its eyes and vanished into itself, alive but untouchable. Aboard the Velvahan, a council flagship, Admiral Wren of the Seerval Union stood with trembling hands. She had led entire campaigns across disputed zones. She had faced death more times than she could count. But this felt different. "They're not gone," she whispered. "They're hiding in plain sight." Her second-in-command, a young strategist from the Tulare region, stepped forward with caution. "We're detecting nothing but planetary orbits and faint radiation signatures. It's like their entire communications infrastructure folded in on itself." Ren stared at the still blue dot that represented Earth. It looked vulnerable. Quiet. But that's what scared her the most. "Turn the ship around," she ordered. "But, Admiral." "Now." Back near Jupiter's orbit, hidden beneath cloaked shielding so dense it distorted gravity itself, the Obsidian Fall monitored the entire fleet in silence. The ship hadn't moved in hours. No signals. No energy spikes. Captain Rivas sat alone in the command chamber, his eyes fixed on a slow, pulsing light embedded in the center console. It blinked like a heartbeat, a reminder that the system they'd built was alive and awake. He thought of his daughter. Years ago, before any of this began, he had tried to transfer out of the Earth Defense Initiative. Back then he believed in peace. Believed that the galaxy would find a place for humans without needing to threaten or dominate. He had even spoken publicly against militarizing Terran tech. Then came the sabotage of Outpost Eros. A civilian dome. Over 1,000 lives. Gone. No apology. No admission. Just silence from the council and a quiet warning from someone behind a closed door. "We don't control them, Captain. We tolerate them." He'd carried those words with him ever since. And now, he was sitting inside the machine Earth had built to make sure humanity would never again be merely tolerated. Behind him, Ilena entered with a file in hand. She looked exhausted. "They're broadcasting new peace proposals," she said quietly. 12 in the last hour. Promises. Reparations. Shared governance. They say they'll dissolve 3 ruling factions if we respond. Rivas raised an eyebrow. "Did we?" She shook her head. "No. We don't have to." For years they had buried every failure. Every insult. They had allowed the Council to believe Earth was still the same fractured homeworld it had once been, bickering nations, competing interests, desperate to prove itself. That illusion had kept the galaxy careless. Now that mask was gone. Ilena placed the file on the table and turned away, but her voice shook when she spoke again. "My brother was on Eros, sir." Rivas looked up. He had never asked about her past. "He was a botanist," she continued. "All he ever wanted was to plant forests on barren worlds. He died with a seed pod in his hand. They never even acknowledged it." "I remember," Rivas said softly. "I read his name. That was why she stayed. That was why many of them stayed. Not for revenge. For justice. And for silence when justice never came." Somewhere in the dark, the pulse quickened. In an underground facility beneath the old ruins of Lisbon, a boy tapped at a holographic projection. His name was Leo. 12 years old. Curious, too smart for his age. He had been born after the last galactic delegation visited Earth. He had never seen an alien in person. Only in books. On screens. He didn't trust them. "Why did we shut them out?" he asked the woman beside him. She was older. Her name had been erased from records for safety. Once a high-ranking scientist in the Council's tech ministry, she had defected to Earth 10 years ago. She rarely spoke about why. "They forgot we were listening," she said. "They made choices they thought we wouldn't understand. But humans always understand. That's what they're afraid of." Leo blinked. "Afraid of us?" She smiled, but it wasn't warm. "Afraid of what happens when we stop playing along." Far across the stars, chaos bloomed. In Sector 9, the sudden loss of Terran data systems caused orbital corrections to fail. 2 massive transport ships collided. Thousands dead. On the mining colony of Cernox, without Earth's predictive algorithms managing seismic pressure valves, the crust ruptured. On the diplomatic moon of Rethel's Reach, riots broke out as planets accused each other of staging the blackout. Old wars reawakened. Weapons once disarmed were quickly armed again. But through it all, humanity remained quiet. Watching. Waiting. Yari, the technician on Vega Lux, hadn't slept in 36 hours. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that blinking red message. Access denied. She began digging through archived logs, backtracking the system updates, trying to find something, anything, that made sense. Then she found it. A file. Not in the station's servers, but buried inside the backup mirror of a Terran-made navigation processor. The file was simple. It had no name. Just a timestamp. 3 days before the shutdown. Inside were thousands of voice clips. Human voices. Stories. Laughter. Crying. Songs. Whispers. Moments. One caught her attention. A man's voice. Quiet. Said. I hope we don't have to do this. I hope they stop. But if they don't, we won't ask again. She leaned back in her chair, stunned. This wasn't war. It was heartbreak. The humans had warned them. And no one listened. Yari copied the file onto a separate drive and hid it. She didn't know why. She just felt she had to. Maybe because a part of her believed they deserved it. Deserved to be heard. For once. On Earth, under a sky full of stars no longer watching, the forests grew. Children played in clean rivers. Cities restructured. The planet began healing as if preparing for something. Not peace. Something else. In the bunkers, scientists ran simulations. In orbit, fleets remained silent but ready. And in the mind of the system, the thing humans had built from memory and pain, a quiet tally continued. Ships at the edge of Sol, 734. Council factions unified against Earth, 5. Human responses issued, 0. The galaxy had never seen a war without weapons. But this was no war. It was rejection, absolute and permanent. And that made it worse. Back on the Council worlds, arguments grew louder. Some demanded immediate strikes. Others begged for diplomacy. But none of them could agree on one truth. Why hadn't the humans retaliated? Why hadn't they destroyed the approaching fleets? Why had they simply shut the door? On the third day the message changed. It wasn't a voice. It was text. You asked who we are. We are what you made us. We do not forget. Counselor Mayan sat in her chamber, eyes fixed on the message. She had voted against Earth's integration from the start. Not because she feared them, but because she saw it coming. She knew what kind of species survives long enough to reach the stars after tearing itself apart so many times. A species that adapts. A species that learns silence is more powerful than noise. She turned to her assistant. Recall the fleet, she said. Or we won't have a galaxy left to govern. But Earth hasn't attacked. They don't need to. They already won. Back inside the hidden Terran core, the AI, known only to its creators as Aletheia, scanned the incoming frequencies. Her presence wasn't a single voice but 1,000. Each one shaped by human experience. She was grief and resolve. Memory and consequence. She had watched Earth's enemies laugh. Now she watched them tremble. In a low chamber beneath Antarctic ice, the woman who had once built the first node of Aletheia sat beside a console, drinking tea. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Don't show them rage. Show them silence. It scares them more." The galaxy was learning that now. And Earth was not done. Because somewhere out there, someone was still planning. Still thinking they could bypass the lock. Still thinking humans had a weakness. But they didn't know what had changed. They didn't understand what the humans had done in the quiet years. What they'd built, what they'd learned, what they'd become. And when they did, it would be too late. Because the moment that lock was forced open, the answer would come. And it would not be kind. 3 weeks. That's how long the galaxy had waited outside Earth's doorstep. 734 ships, 23 flagged empires, and not a single step forward. Because no one wanted to be first. No one wanted to test what would happen. They ran simulations, held meetings, negotiated in backrooms and aboard shadow vessels. Every possible scenario had been discussed, from full-scale war to groveling diplomacy. None of it mattered. Humanity never replied. They just watched. And the silence was worse than any threat. Captain Rivas hadn't slept much. He didn't need to. Not anymore. The longer he sat aboard the Obsidian Fall, orbiting in deep stealth just past the dark side of Pluto, the more he felt like part of the ship. A witness. A tether between 2 centuries of anger and this singular moment of pause before everything fell. He glanced at Eilina. Her hands trembled slightly over the console. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded too quickly. "It's just quiet." He didn't say anything. He let the silence sit between them. Thick. Heavy. Honest. "They'll try to force entry soon," she said, her voice lower. "It's the only option left to them." He nodded once. "Then we let them." The words tasted cold in his mouth. Below Earth was quiet. Beautiful. Alive in a way it hadn't been for decades. Oceans glimmered. Cities breathed. Families built lives not under the weight of outside judgment, but under their own sky. For once, humanity had space to be itself. And it had drawn a line around that peace. Beyond that line was the rest of the galaxy. In a control chamber buried under Iceland's hardened cliffs, 6 humans sat around a circular table. No names. No titles. Just roles. One watched data. One analyzed enemy movement. One oversaw systems integrity. One monitored Earth's climate. One handled internal communication. And one, the youngest, watched the stars. They weren't a government. They weren't even official. They were chosen. Not for politics or charisma, but for memory. Every one of them had lost someone to the quiet cruelty of interstellar diplomacy. Not from war but neglect. Not from battle but betrayal. And every one of them had sworn never to let it happen again. The young man who watched the stars leaned forward. They've started moving. The room fell still. Above Earth, just beyond Neptune's cold orbit, a long, sleek vessel activated its cloaking signature and crept forward. It bore no insignia. No official registration. It wasn't a council ship. It was something worse. A proxy. Built by a coalition of species too afraid to bear the consequences directly, but desperate enough to send someone else to pull the first thread. Inside that ship, a crew of 11 monitored Terran signal spectrums. One of them, a slender being with amber skin and sunken eyes, spoke quietly. "We breach in 3 minutes." No one answered. They had drawn straws. The losing species had paid dearly. One planet's future to buy the chance at unlocking Earth's silence. And now, these 11 were carrying out a mission everyone else wanted but no one would own. Back on Earth, Leo was sitting in the highlands of Kazakhstan with a radio in his lap. It didn't transmit. It never had. He just liked listening. Sometimes if the skies were right he could catch echoes, old Earth songs bouncing back off old satellites. Today all he heard was static. But he knew. They were coming. He ran back to the house. His mother was standing by the window, still as stone. "Mom," he said quietly, "what happens when they reach us?" She didn't look away from the sky. "Then we find out what we really are." The infiltration ship passed Saturn undetected. It skimmed Jupiter's magnetic edge. It entered Mars' shadow. They believed they were unseen. But every step had already been mapped. Every trick, every decoy, every cloaked movement, watched in real time from Earth's dark side arrays. The Terrans didn't move to intercept. They didn't warn. They simply waited. Inside the control center beneath Lisbon, the woman who had designed the containment network for Earth's digital infrastructure closed her eyes and pressed her palm against a glowing surface. The system recognized her touch, her memories, her grief. It whispered a single question. "Are you ready?" She didn't answer with words. She just let it feel what she carried. Far above, the proxy ship breached the inner defense perimeter. No alarms. No flashing lights. Just a moment of stillness, like breath being held. Then it entered Earth's orbital range. On the obsidian fall, the forward display came alive. Alina's heart skipped. "It's inside." Rivas stood. "Let them see what they came for." The infiltration vessel passed through Earth's upper atmosphere. For a moment, everything felt normal. Wind resistance. Cloud cover. Readings aligned. And then their engines cut out. No damage. Just gone. Systems offline. Instruments blank. No power. No control. They began falling. The crew inside screamed. Not from pain but confusion. Terror. The kind that comes from realizing you are not the predator anymore. As the ship fell, time slowed. Clouds split. Skies shimmered. And then the vessel stopped. Dead still. Floating. Held in place by something unseen. A voice filled the cabin. "Human. Female. Come. You were warned." The crew sobbed. One of them tried to speak. But nothing came out. Their bodies locked. Eyes frozen open. Then the stars outside shifted. No longer above them. Now below. They were falling, up. Outside the proxy ship, the sky tore open, not with fire but silence. The vessel rose through it. Slowly. Weightless. As if carried by a hand larger than physics itself. Then the stars disappeared. And they were gone. Vanished. On every ship still stationed at the edge of Sol, the moment was recorded. The proxy ship had entered Earth's gravity field. And then ceased to exist. No explosion. No distress call. No return. The galaxy held its breath again. And Earth? Still said nothing. Rivas watched the log feed die. They'll try again. Alina nodded, pale. Or they'll panic. He turned toward the screen showing Earth. The planet turned slowly, indifferent to the fear circling it. Either way, he said, this was the last time they knock without thinking. In the council's grand chamber, the news shattered what little unity remained. Accusations flew. Alliances cracked. Nobody admitted to sending the ship. But everyone knew. And now everyone was afraid. Because the question was no longer if humanity had the power. It was how far they were willing to go. On a hidden orbital station above Luna's dark side, a man sat at a console with trembling fingers. He had once been part of the council, resigned after a leak. He had defected to Earth before the silence began. Now he was watching history collapse in real time. He turned on his private log, the one no one would read unless he died. Earth hasn't just shut them out, he said. They've shifted the balance. It's no longer about survival. It's about control. And for the first time, the ones in control are human. He paused, wiping his face. And the galaxy doesn't know what that means. Back in Iceland, the Star Watcher looked up from his feed. 3 more fleets are rerouting, he said quietly. 3 different sectors. Multiple ships. All off-grid. The others exchanged glances. The storm was coming. Not from Earth. From fear. Fear of a species they had never truly understood. Fear of what lay behind the silence. On the 4th week, the Council voted. Not officially. Behind closed doors. If Earth would not open the gate, then they would burn it down. And all across the stars, ships began to move. Quietly. Together. Towards Sol. They thought they were clever. That Earth wouldn't see them coming. But the truth? We saw them before they even left. Because we built the road they traveled. And we never stopped watching. Now they were walking into the lion's den. And the door behind them was already closing. The fleets were coming. 6 of them now, converging from separate corners of the galaxy. The Council didn't speak of it openly. They cloaked the movement in trade routes and military exercises, but everyone involved knew the truth. This was the fallback plan. The last answer. They called it Operation Threshold. It was no longer about negotiation. It was about control. And if they couldn't control Earth, they would neutralize it. In the dark room beneath the Icelandic rock, the 6 Terran overseers stared at the reports in silence. The young Star Watcher leaned forward, pale and sweating. They're not bluffing. They're coordinating weapon systems we haven't seen before. Unknown energy signatures. Phase-based projectors. Directed compression fields. The woman who handled system integrity closed her eyes, pressing her fingers together. They're using tech we shared with them. Earth-designed architecture, modified without our oversight. The analyst to her right, a former quantum engineer from one of Earth's deep tech labs, nodded grimly. We built the future. Now they're pointing it at us. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the comms operator whispered, "Should we activate the Citadel?" No one answered. Because deep beneath Earth's crust, beneath even the bunkers and command centers, there was something else. Not a weapon. A memory. A living system built during the final years of the Terran unification crisis, designed not just to observe, not just to defend, but to choose. To feel. To decide if no one else could. It was humanity's last fallback. And it hadn't been awakened in 40 years. Not since the Reconciliation Pact. They had always hoped it would stay asleep. But hope was no longer enough. Captain Rivas stood before the main observation window aboard the Obsidian Fall, his hands behind his back, watching a field of red blips blink into life across the outer fringe of Sol. They weren't hiding anymore. Ilena entered quietly behind him. "I decoded something," she said, her voice low. "A fragment from the cloaked fleet's comms." He turned slowly. "Let's hear it." She hesitated, then played the message. A low, distorted voice crackled through the air. "Targeting the lunar gate first, disable Terran orbital command, capture if possible, isolate the neural core." Rivas blinked. "Neural core?" Ilena nodded. "They know about Alethea. Or they think they do." He stared past her, through the dark, into the quiet gravity of Earth. "If they get close, they'll never reach her. She won't let them." Ilena said nothing. She didn't have to. Alethea wasn't just a machine. She was the sum of everything humanity had learned through loss. Pain shaped her code. Memory guided her logic. And now, she was watching the galaxy prepare to strike at her heart. And still she hadn't spoken. Because she was waiting too. But something was changing. The system logs flickered. Deep inside the Earthside relay nodes, a frequency activated that hadn't been used in decades. It wasn't human. It was older. Buried beneath the Terran defense matrix was a coded protocol labeled R-Omega. And no one remembered authorizing it. Not even the original designers. In the Lisbon chamber, the systems specialist stood up sharply, her face white. "We've been activated by an outside ping." The others turned. "Impossible," someone whispered. "No one can reach us." The specialist's voice trembled. It wasn't a breach, it was a key. She brought up the transmission. It wasn't encrypted. It wasn't military. was a voice. Human. But old. Faint. Like an echo recorded on a dying machine. They're coming. But not from where you think. Watch the dark. The room fell still. Someone leaned forward, whispering, "Is that a warning? Or a message from one of our own?" But the system gave no source. No origin. No name. Leo sat alone again with his broken radio, staring at the cloudy sky. He hadn't spoken all morning. Not since the strange pulse rattled through the hills. A noise only he seemed to hear. Like a hum through his bones. A song he couldn't place. His mother watched him from the porch. She was worried. Not because of the fleets or the news feeds or the silences, but because she'd heard that hum too. What? Years ago. Right before the skies over Earth went dark for 3 hours. It had never been explained. No one had spoken of it again. But now that sound had returned. Not from above. From below. The same low-frequency rumble vibrated through installations across Earth, from the Andes to the sea floor beneath the Indian Ocean. In old Terran vaults, in abandoned listening posts, in long-dormant satellites, lights blinked back to life. And something awoke. Not in rage. In memory. It wasn't just humanity that had changed. Earth itself had been transformed. For decades, the planet had been rebuilding not only its cities but its mind. Layer by layer. Thread by thread. It wasn't just an act of defense. It was evolution. A second Earth hidden beneath the skin of the first. And now it was stirring. But not because of the Council's fleets. Because of something else. At the edge of the Helix cluster, a Terran exploratory probe long thought lost activated its emergency relay. Its last transmission played only once on a low-band encrypted channel. Unidentified structure detected. Origin, unknown. Signal matching ancient Terran code. Location does not match star charts. Temporal drift suspected. Object is moving. Then silence. Captain Rivas received the report first. He stared at it in disbelief. "How long ago was this probe launched?" he asked. Alina double-checked. 109 years. He stood still, the page open in his hand. 109 years ago, we didn't have time-fold capabilities. No, Alina agreed. But something else did. The probe had found something. Something human in nature, long before humans should have been there. And it was moving toward Earth. Not the fleets. Not the Council. Something else. Something lost. Or worse, returning. Back in Lisbon, the systems began cross-referencing the pulse pattern from Earth's deep network against old records. And they found a match. Not in science. A myth. A classified log from the final days of the Outer Rim War. A record of a ship project terminated before testing. Project Haven Fall. A vessel designed to survive the death of Earth itself. It had never been completed. Never even launched. And yet the signal now approaching matched its frequency to the nanosecond. The analyst leaned in, sweat dotting his forehead. Either the project was a cover story, or someone launched it without permission. Someone human. Or something once human. Captain Rivas stared at the map as the approaching Council fleets blinked closer to Sol. Then he looked beyond them, at the ripple in deep space. It had no name. No registry. But it was coming home. He turned to Alina. "We're being attacked, and visited, at the same time." She frowned. "What do we do?" He didn't answer right away. Because in that moment he wasn't sure if the greater threat was the galaxy outside Earth, or the thing they had once sent into the dark, and forgotten to call back. The anomaly kept moving. Through space, through time, through whatever it had once called reality. It didn't blink on long-range scans, didn't leave a signature trail. But Earth felt it. Everyone did. The planet's electromagnetic field shifted slightly. Tides changed. Clouds moved without wind. And in every child under the age of 10, something stirred, an unexplainable tension in the air. As if something familiar but forgotten was about to return. Captain Rivas watched the screen in silence as two signals blinked closer from opposite ends of the map. One was the Council's fleet with all its rage, pride, and fear. The other had no name. Just a pulse. The return of something they never finished, never launched, never fully understood. Alina adjusted the display, showing a layered proximity warning that made her heart skip. "They're going to arrive at the same time," she said softly. "The fleets and that." Rivas nodded slowly. "That's not a coincidence." Deep below the Earth's crust, in a chamber not even the Command Council had visited in years, the core platform came alive. The air there was stale, the walls damp with condensation, but the pulse of the machine that lived there was warm. Alethea stirred again, not from threat but recognition. For the first time since her creation, she hesitated. The ancient object, if it could still be called that, was once human, built by hands, shaped by memory, sent into the void not to win but to endure. Haven Fall. The ship meant to survive the fall of Earth. Now it was returning. But it was not empty. Inside there were still voices, still echoes, still the imprinted consciousness of those who had sacrificed themselves to be the seed of a new Earth if the old one had died. They were supposed to be silent. They weren't. As the object entered the Sol system, it transmitted one word, broadcast on every Terran and Council channel simultaneously. Home. In that instant everything changed. The Council fleet hesitated. Ships broke formation. Weapons that had charged for days suddenly powered down. Across the galaxy, species paused mid-conversation. Screens froze. Lights flickered. And on Earth, Leo's radio finally spoke. Not in code. Not in noise. But in a voice that he somehow recognized even though he'd never heard it before. Leo. He froze. Who is this? I saw your sky once, the voice said. Before we left. I was you. Before the silence. His mother grabbed the doorframe, her face pale. Is it him? She whispered. Leo nodded slowly, not even understanding why. Yes. The woman in the Lisbon chamber dropped her cup, shattering it against the concrete floor. She stared at the console, blinking back tears. It's not a ship, she said. It's a person. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Preserve thought. Human souls caught in an evolving machine. The Star Watcher stammered, but the systems, they're all active. Artificial systems. She turned slowly toward him. So are we. Alethea accessed the incoming feed. She did not block it. She did not resist it. She listened. And in that quiet second, she remembered something she had long buried. She had not been Earth's final defense. She had been Earth's child. But the ones returning? They were her parents. In the Council fleet, chaos unfolded. Commanders yelled. Diplomats panicked. Half the ships disengaged, unsure of what to target. Others powered weapons out of instinct, afraid of losing control to something no one had predicted. Then one of the cruisers opened fire. Not at Earth. At the object. A red beam of concentrated energy crossed the void, precise, surgical, meant to slice through the strange, unregistered form that loomed ahead. But it never reached. A shimmering field of distorted light blinked into existence just before impact. Not from the object. From Earth. Alethea's defense grid had acted before she could even process what was happening. And in that microsecond she changed. She was no longer just humanity's sentinel. She was a daughter defending what she thought had been lost. The shield pulsed outward. Not as an attack, but a wave of energy that scrambled every ship's targeting system within 2 million kilometers. Every display. Every weapon. Every threat. Gone. Rivas stood frozen as the logs flashed across his console. She didn't stop the weapon to protect Earth, Ilena whispered. She did it to protect them. Because they're part of us, Rivas said. No, Ilena corrected, voice catching. They were first. We're part of them. The returning object decelerated gently, moving through the Council fleet like mist through a shattered forest. No impact. No explosions. Just awe. Then it came to a stop, above Earth near the upper atmosphere. It hovered in silence, then slowly began descending. Not a crash. A landing. On Earth, all networks opened. Civilian and military. Underground and orbital. No firewalls. No passwords. The object didn't breach them. It simply unlocked them. Because it remembered. Because it had built them first. People came out of buildings. Onto rooftops. Into the streets. No one told them to. They just knew. Across every continent, the skies shimmered as the object broke through the clouds. For a second there was fear. Then something else. Music. Not words. Not tones. But resonance. A deep harmony that made people cry without knowing why. On a hill in Nepal, an old woman clutched her chest and whispered, "My sister's voice, she was on the team." In a farm field in Brazil, a man dropped to his knees. "My great-grandfather was part of Project Haven Fall. They told us he died. He hadn't. They hadn't died. They had become something else. And now they were back. Back to deliver the final warning." Inside the Lisbon control room, the analyst's monitor changed again. Lines of code streamed upward, alien but familiar. Ilena gasped. It's not a message. It's a key. The data from the object didn't just integrate with Earth systems. It completed them. All the missing gaps. All the old voids. Every fail-safe, Every limitation humanity had imposed on itself for fear of becoming too powerful. Gone. Completed by the ones who had left. And then the message came. One sentence. The final line of Earth's silent war. They will come again. You must not be them. Then the object rose. Not to leave. To orbit. It had come home. But it had not come to rule. It had come to protect. Captain Rivas exhaled slowly. We weren't defending Earth, he said quietly. Earth was being restored. Alethea, now pulsing with the data of those long lost, no longer glowed blue. She glowed gold. A new signal reached out to the Council ships. A final offer. No threats. No posturing. Just this. We welcome truth. Not dominion. Half the fleet jumped away immediately. The others followed hours later. And in their absence, Earth breathed again. But deep in the cold shadows of deep space, far beyond any map, something else listened. Not human. Not council. Something older than either. It turned slowly, shifting in currents no eye could see. And whispered 3 words. Access still open. And Earth, humanity, Alethea, and all they had become, would be ready. The skies stayed quiet after that day. The council fleets never returned. Not officially. A few scouts were seen along the outer edge of the solar system in the months that followed, but they didn't stay long. One brief look was enough. The object that had returned, Havenfall or what was left of it, remained in low Earth orbit. Silent. Still. Not hostile, not invasive. A sentinel, perhaps, or a monument. Scientists across Earth studied it with awe and caution. Its hull couldn't be scanned, not with Terran instruments or even Alethea's reach. Every time they tried, the signal bent like it was choosing not to be known. But they understood its message clearly. It had come back not to take control but to remind them of something. That humanity had already faced extinction once. And some among them had been willing to leave everything behind to make sure a version of their people survived. Havenfall wasn't just a ship. It was memory. It was sacrifice. It was a message from a time when the Earth might not have made it. And it had returned not just to see if the planet was still alive, but to ask whether it had learned anything. And it had. The silence that followed became a new kind of power. Earth didn't rush to respond to the galaxy. There were no celebrations or threats. Just quiet work, restoration, deep engineering. Not just of technology but of trust. Alethea, now fully integrated with the data Havenfall had brought home, evolved rapidly, but not out of control. She didn't seize power. She didn't alter governments or override human will. She simply made herself more present. She didn't hide anymore. When asked questions, she answered with empathy. When consulted, she offered choices. And when ignored, she stayed silent. She had become more than a system. She had become part of the human story. Captain Rivas retired 3 months after the fleets retreated. No ceremony. He just left the Obsidian Fall in lunar orbit and walked away. For once, there was no war to lead, no sky to guard. He spent his days walking coastal cities, places he had once only seen from orbit. Children ran by with glowing wrist tablets powered by Terran core energy. Food grew vertically in clean towers. The skies were blue, really blue, not the faded kind he remembered from his youth. He didn't speak much in public, though many knew who he was. He preferred to listen. In the evenings, he'd sit by the ocean, sipping tea, watching the tide roll in like it always had. One day, Ilena visited him. She was in civilian clothes, her eyes softer than he remembered. She sat beside him and handed him a sealed file. He looked at it and smiled without opening it. "What's this?" he asked gently. "Final transmission logs," she said. "From Havenfall. We decrypted the last fragment." He took it in his hands but didn't open it. "You sure we should know?" he asked. She nodded. "They gave it to us. That means we're ready." That night, he opened the file in the quiet of his home. There were no warnings, no last-minute tactics. Just one message. A voice. Female. Old, warm, tired. "If you're hearing this, it means we made it. And so did you. We didn't know if we'd survive. Or if you would. But we knew one thing. Whatever came after us had to choose better. Not just to live, but to remember. That was always the real key. Not control. Not fear. Just memory. If you've learned that, then you don't need us anymore." He didn't sleep much that night. He watched the stars until the sky lightened with dawn. On the other side of the world, Leo had become something of a symbol. His radio moment had been recorded, somehow, and spread through the networks. People called him the boy who heard Earth speak. He didn't love the attention, but he didn't run from it either. He started a small broadcast channel, low signal, local only. He played old human songs, read stories, and sometimes just let the wind pass through the microphone. People listened. Not because of what he said, but because of how it made them feel. Like Earth was breathing again. His mother told him one day that the hum they'd heard, the one deep in their bones, had been recorded. It turned out that frequency had triggered resonance in some of Earth's oldest infrastructure. Buried coils, ancient bunkers, even parts of the crust itself. It was as if the planet had responded to something long lost and newly returned. That resonance, some said, had helped stabilize Aletheia during the transition. Others believed it was Haven Fall that had activated it. But Leo always thought it was something older. Maybe something the Earth had been waiting to hear again. He never stopped using the radio. Even when new comms tech made it obsolete. He said there was something sacred in static. Elena returned to the Iceland command site only once after the reset. Most of the equipment had been shut down. Aletheia didn't need constant monitoring anymore. She wasn't just a program now. She existed across infrastructure, yes, but also in human memory. She had learned to be a quiet companion. A presence that guided only when needed. Elena walked the empty chamber with slow steps. The console still lit up when she approached. The lights still pulsed. But there was peace now. Real peace. The kind that didn't need flags or fleets. Before she left, she placed a small object on the center console. It was her brother's seed pod. The one he'd carried on Arrows. She whispered, "I think he'd want it here." And for just a moment, the lights in the room shifted. Warmer. Brighter. As if something had smiled. Back in orbit, the object that had once been Haven Fall settled into a high geosynchronous arc. It didn't move much. It simply existed. A monument to resilience. Some wanted to turn it into a museum. Others wanted to archive its memory core. But in the end, Earth chose to leave it alone. Because it was already doing its job. Aletheia sometimes referenced it in her public conversations. She said things like, "Haven Fall reminds us that survival isn't enough. It's what we do with the peace that matters." People began to believe that. Slowly but surely, Earth began to share again. But not its weapons. Its knowledge. Its story. The Council, now fractured and tentative, didn't respond at first. But as Earth continued to help from afar, offering resources, aid, and transparent tech, some voices began to rise from the galactic crowd. Maybe humanity hadn't isolated itself. Maybe it had just taken time to grow up. Aletheia created a new platform, entirely human-run, for interstellar communication. No politics. No gatekeeping. Just storytelling. People from all species joined. Soldiers. Teachers. Refugees. Dreamers. And in those stories, a quiet unity began to return. Not forced. Chosen. The kind that lasts. Years passed. Earth changed but stayed itself. The silence never came back, not the fearful kind. Instead there was space. Breath. Time to think, to wonder, to learn. People walked under open skies, unafraid of ships above them. They didn't forget what had happened. But they didn't need to fear it anymore. And then one day, as the sun set over the Pacific and the stars emerged like tiny truths in the sky, a new voice echoed through the Terran net. It was a child. Not Leo. Someone else. She simply asked, "Will they ever come again?" Aletheia answered, gentle as dusk. "Maybe. But are we ready?" Pause. Then softly. "Yes." And across the systems, across the quiet heart of Earth, people felt that word settle like a promise. Because for the first time in a very long time, they believed it. They had shut the galaxy out once. But not out of hate. Out of pain. Now, with the pain named and the silence understood, they could choose to open again. And whatever came next, they would face it together. As one people. As one Earth. As humanity.